Hey everybody, in this video I'll be taking a look at the Necromancer Spells for Frostgrave 2nd edition and comparing them to their 1st edition versions. Hey everybody, I'm Alan with Bricks and Blocks Gaming, the channel that plays tabletop games using toy bricks and blocks and discusses the rules and the strategies that build the foundations for those games. Be sure to check the description box below for timestamps, links to some of our other Frostgrave content, and the link to Osprey Games' official PDF that explains all the spells for Frostgrave 2nd edition. This video does assume that the viewer has at least some familiarity with either the 1st or the 2nd edition of Frostgrave, and it's part of a 10 video series where I'll be taking a look at each wizard school from Frostgrave 2nd edition and discussing removed spells, slightly changed or overhauled spells, new spells, and my personal opinions about the changes. The term Necromancer is a fairly common term found in fantasy stories and games, depicting a wizard that focuses on the darker elements of magic. And as such, a lot of players that are new to this game, as they flip through the book, will probably recognize the Necromancer school and what they do more than they would possibly a thaumaturge or a sigillist, which aren't very common terms. In the 1st edition, the Necromancer had an array of spells focusing on bones, death, and the undead. And they were well known for flinging bone darts across the battlefield and for raising zombies. So now let's take a look at the bricks and blocks that make up the 2nd edition Necromancer spells. None of the returning spells have been completely overhauled, and most of the changes are subtle or simply clarify how some spells function. There is one of the spells that has been removed though. Reveal Death had the exact same function as the 1st edition Chronomancer spell, Petrify, and neither of these two spells seem to get a lot of play. In the 2nd edition, the Petrify spell had its casting number reduced, gained a secondary function, and is now harder for targets to resist. Reveal Death, however, just got completely removed. Which I think is good, because having two spells in the game that do the same thing, unless they're from opposing wizard schools, is kind of redundant. And by removing Reveal Death and putting a new spell into its place, it creates more variety in the overall spell pool. There are two spells, though, that the Necromancer has that do have similar spells in the opposing school. And the first one is Spell Eater. This cancels the effect of any spell within line of sight. And remember that maximum line of sight has been reduced to 24 inches in the 2nd edition. This spell works exactly the same as the 1st edition version and is exactly the same as Dispel from the Thaumaturge school, except that Spell Eater deals 1 damage to the caster upon successful casting. I think a spell with this function is important to be included in both these opposing schools, because the ability to cancel an existing spell is very powerful. In this way, every school has access to this power in some way. And I think that the 1 damage that Spell Eater deals to the caster is somehow thematic for the Necromancer. Steal Health allows the caster to drain some of the life force from a target on the battlefield. The spell still can't be used on undead or constructs, but unlike the 1st edition, it can be used on demons. If the spell succeeds and the target fails their will roll, the caster will gain 3 health, even if that is more health than the target had remaining. If you target a friendly unit, instead of them fleeing towards the closest table edge, they will act like an uncontrolled creature for the remainder of the game, and they still permanently leave the warband. And keep in mind the new casting roll minimum, making all rolls to resist spells needing at least a roll of 14 to succeed. This spell is kind of the counterpart to the Thaumaturge's Heal spell, as this is the only form of healing that a Necromancer has available at the start of a campaign. And the fact that it doesn't heal as much as that spell, and it damages a target in the process, makes it very thematic for the Necromancer. Strike Dead is a powerful spell that instantly kills its target. The only change to the text is it has no effect on the undead or on constructs. Since the casting number starts at 18, the new minimum casting number of 14 to resist spells likely won't come into play here. And really, you need a high roll for this spell to be fully effective anyway, as any target is allowed to empower their roll. So even a successful cast might only deal a few damage to the target, because a target should always empower their will roll against the spell if it keeps them from dying. With the casting number so high and the lack of reliable healing for the Necromancer, this spell is hard to cast and hard to empower, and I think that Strike Dead will be a dead spell for many wizards. Bone Dart flings a bone at a target, dealing non-magic damage. The casting number was raised to 10 from 8, and the range has been reduced to just 12 inches, instead of being anywhere in line of sight. These changes mean we probably won't see as many bone darts flying across the battlefield, but it is still a solid spell. Bones of the Earth causes a skeletal hand to reach out of the ground and grab a target's ankle. In the first edition, any form of magical movement could free the target from this grasp. But now, Leap cannot do this, and the author clarified on the Frostgrave Facebook page that the new Suggestion spell also cannot free the target. Large creatures can no longer be held by the bony hand, and it's stated that allied figures in base contact with the target can now attack the hand and add support bonuses as if the hand was an uncontrolled creature. This spell can still be a good way to stop an advancing enemy or prevent an enemy spellcaster from using any spells for a turn. And if the dice rolls are in your favor, you could potentially damage and hold that target or defeat them completely. Just keep in mind the figure must be standing on the ground, not on an elevated platform, to be targeted by this as the hand comes out of the earth. Raise Zombie animates a dead body to fight alongside the warband. The casting number was raised from 8 to 10, and a B in parentheses was added to the description, letting you know it is cast before the battle, not after, if it's used as an out-of-game spell. It's specified that if the zombie is defeated or leaves the table, a new one can be raised. The increased casting number for this spell, I think, was a healthy change, as the ability to create additional members for your warband, perhaps multiple times in the same battle, is extremely powerful, especially considering that zombies have had their fight stat raised from +0 in the first edition now to +1 in the second edition. Control Undead allows you to take control of an uncontrolled undead figure or an opponent's undead figure. This spell works the same in the second edition, except now a spellcaster can use an action to cancel control of a target, which can be useful if a better target wanders onto the board. This is a fairly situational spell, as there will be some battles that never see undead monsters wander onto the board. But I think that this spell and other control spells that target a specific enemy type are more useful in games or campaigns with large numbers of players, as there will be more viable targets. It's also quite useful if you play against someone who always casts Raise Zombie. And with the Reveal Death spell being removed, there is one new spell for the Necromancer, which is Animate Skull. This spell allows the caster to hurl a skull filled with dark magic onto the battlefield. This is now the only Necromancer spell with a casting number of 8, and the skull can be thrown up to 6 inches and can go directly into combat. It counts as an uncontrolled monster with fairly weak stats, and each caster can only have one of these on the table at a time. I think it's neat that the Necromancers now have another undead unit they can spring up on the battlefield, but its function is fairly similar to the Bones of the Earth spell. The skull has more armor than that bony hand, so it could be harder to defeat, and can be thrown into elevated positions, and the casting number is lower. However, Bones of the Earth has a further range, and won't potentially attack your party members if it gets loose. Even though they are similar, I think both these spells have their uses, and Animate Skull should prove to be more useful than the removed Reveal Death spell. With the exception of removing and adding a spell, there were no major changes to this school. Bone Dart received what I feel was a justified weakening, as the spell could easily get overused in the first edition. And Raise Zombie, while being harder to cast, creates a stronger ally, so that spell's changes kind of balance each other out. I would say the Necromancer has weakened a little because of the increased casting number for 2 of its most commonly used spells, but overall the Necromancer will play pretty much like it did back in the first edition. And those are the changes to the 2nd edition Necromancer Spells. If I missed a detail or got something wrong, let me and the community know in the comments below, as my plan with these videos is to create an accurate resource for players. I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to click like, add a comment, or subscribe so you can keep up with all the content that we're releasing. And with that, I'm Alan with Bricks and Blocks Gaming, and I'll see you on the next video.